August 16th, 2019. Copa Health, with support from the Arizona Department of Health Services, held its 6th annual Emergency Preparedness All-Day Conference titled Vulnerable Populations, Planning for a Pandemic. The conference was based around the United States Department of Health Services and 11 states working on a tabletop exercise that simulated a new virus previously undetected with no vaccine. The exercise was designed to coordinate efforts nationwide in the event of a worldwide pandemic. The exercise was called Crimson Contagion.
And so in Crimson Contagion, what we're finding is that yes, there's going to be a medical response. You could anticipate that now in this phase, there's going to be a significant amount of hospitalizations, and there's going to be a significant amount of deaths. Well, in a pandemic response, it's definitely we're in this together. It's not just to a certain section in a certain area, in a certain group. It's going to be the entire state is going to be impacted.
But here's how we would work to provide vaccines or antivirals to you in the community.
How do we reach those folks that are in the community, and how do we communicate to them at a level that they can understand?
Speaking the same language is critical so that we can get through the emergency. Once you get past the communication issue and we don't have to guess about using codes or using acronyms for certain things, we're speaking the same language. It just makes for a much more effective form of communication.
America's pastime and America's passion converged as summer turned to fall. Fans all over the world came and watched. The autumn leaves gently fell, and suddenly we saw witches and goblins and trick-or-treaters. Families gathered to love and to feast. Crowded malls with holiday revelers. And in a blink of the eye, the year was new, fresh with hope and good cheer. Crowds gathered everywhere. And then everything stopped. Coronavirus, novel coronavirus, COVID-19. Empty shelves, social distancing, stay home, subways, airports empty, stores and restaurants closed, stimulus checks, financial meltdown, schools and houses of worship closed. More deaths than 3 Vietnams.
We were part of the Copa Health conference the previous year, and in doing so, we planned for a lot of things. And in our emergency book that we have a chapter on pandemics. So we were prepared if a pandemic came along, which on a priority of 1 to 10, we thought it was about 2.5 and might be a bad case of the flu. We were not prepared for something no one has ever seen before.
Did we explicitly have something for pandemics? That was part of the overall plan, to be able to handle any emergency, but we're really geared towards fires and things that in Arizona that happen every year. Influenza, different things like that. Pandemic, It was in there, but never been used before.
Here at Pasta Cristo, we really had no emergency plan for anything to prepare us for this entire COVID-19 thing. You know, we have plans for what do we do if a shooter comes on the campus, what do we do if there's an emergency with one of our guests, but as far as this epidemic, we had made no plans for it.
We didn't have a plan in place, for the emergency. But we have protocols from OSHA. OSHA, since 1970s, they were preparing, workplaces for the pandemic. But when we go to say like we have something in plan, no, we didn't have. The good thing is like we were following the protocols and we're very familiar taking care of the patients. But we didn't have a plan specifically for the pandemic. No, we didn't have one.
Prior to the pandemic, we actually did not have a pandemic-specific response plan in place. It was only after the pandemic occurred that we created a very specific COVID-19 pandemic plan. And to this day, I don't leave home without it. As a matter of fact, I carry it with me everywhere I go, actually.
So prior to the pandemic, we had an emergency preparedness plan in place, and it mentioned pandemic, but we weren't specifically prepared with all of the equipment that we needed.
The Arizona Statewide Independent Living Council had a emergency preparedness plan that addressed pandemics. However, knowing now kind of things that we didn't anticipate for COVID-19, we realized that we focused on like swine flu and our imagining of a bad flu season, and that was quite different than our experience with COVID-19. So,
at my university, there were a lot of plans in place for dealing with emergencies and making decisions about how to move forward if there was an emergency, but really not for a problem like COVID.
Yeah, we had never really thought about the idea of needing an emergency plan, certainly not for a pandemic. And the nature of what we do, it probably wouldn't be as applicable as it certainly is for someone like COPA. So, yeah, I don't know that the word pandemic had ever crossed my mind other than in the movies.
I felt COVID was certainly a challenge once it hit in March of 2020. And then when COVID-19 unfortunately approached us, we were able to create a task force fairly quickly and be able to respond to the daily challenges of COVID. Again, while